So, I'd like to make a few remarks about the reading we've just looked at. So one thing we looked at was section 45 of Human or to Human. And there we first met the distinction between the master morality, or the morality of the happy warriors, of the warrior aristocracy of the ancient world, and the people who were not the warrior aristocracy. I think it's quite noticeable that they don't get described at all. We have no sense of who they are. I guess they might be slaves or tenant farmers or women or foreigners, but they're just not the people that we're interested in, right? So, what did we say about the morality of, or the ethics rather? There's a distinction between ethics and morality coming in here that we should pay attention to. Ethics is the customs. It's the whole way of life of your society, of your community, whereas morality is the particular Christian, or well, I guess Judeo-Christian idea of value as a collection of thou shalt nots, and things that you can choose not to do and that you ought not to do. So the first thing we see is that the ethics of the warrior aristocrats, the happy warriors, is about goodness. The concept, the key concept is good. And you should think of this as somebody saying, oh, good man, or, you know, he's a good bloke. Think about what people mean when they say of someone, he's a good bloke. Not necessarily that this person is a saint, but that he's a good companion for other blokes, right? That he stands his ground, generally does the things you'd hope for and expect from a bloke amongst blokes, right? Being good in this sense is closer to being a good bloke, or a solid chap, than it is to being any kind of saint or moral exemplar. And there is this bit about, well, if such a person does something despicable, then, well, it can't be really their fault. A god must have confused them. They must have had a spell cast on them or something. Now, that's a bit odd. What does that mean? Well, one thing that Nietzsche is preparing here is the thought that the doctrine of free will, and consequently moral responsibility that goes with it, is part and parcel of the model of morality that he's building a contrast with. So if you think about Oedipus, right? So Oedipus is fated to seduce his mother and marry his and kill his father, right? And the augury, the seer, sees this, and his parents know this, so they send him off to be raised somewhere else. But he ends up doing it anyway, right? And the efforts that people made to try and help him escape his fate actually just turn out to be part of the way in which his fate works itself out. When he discovers what he's done, he blinds himself, not because he feels responsible, right? He knows that this was his fate. So if he had the kind of moral outlook where the idea of free will was central to it, then he could say to himself, well, you know, I didn't know it was them. It's not my fault. But this is a Greek tragedy, and so rather he says, I have done a terrible thing. Never mind whether it was really my fault, whether it was avoidable. I find myself in a condition of a kind of unsustainable ethical condition. And the reason for this is partly because character in this kind of ethics is taken to be to do with ancestry. So if you're of good parentage, if you're of good stock, then you must have good character, because that's how character is formed. And so if you do something despicable, it must be either because you're somehow turned out to be of low stock, but we have your family tree, so there must be some other explanation, a spell, divine intervention, something like that, something that can explain away how a person of good character, of good stock, of good family can do something despicable. Something else I want to say about this contrast between the ethics of the warrior elite and the moral outlook of everybody else is that it's sometimes possible to fall into a kind of symmetry, into thinking that the one is the mirror image of the other. This is not the case. And to start to see this, look at the fact that the happy warriors notice each other, but they don't notice anybody else at all. So if you look at Homer, although the warrior aristocracy must have been a numerical minority in ancient Greek society, there were more slaves and peasant farmers and women than male warrior aristocrats. Nevertheless, apart from a few special women like Helen of Troy and Penelope, the wife of Odysseus, none of these people feature, right? The literature and in the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, similarly, everybody else is pretty much absent. They don't have speaking parts, certainly. There are a few flute girls at the drinking party that Plato reports on in the Symposium, but you know. So the happy warriors, the warrior aristocrats, don't really notice other kinds of people. They're only really interested in their relations with people of their own class. Whereas the horizon of everybody else is also filled with the warrior aristocrats, right? But with the difference that all the attention is, well, what are they going to do to us? What cruelties will they inflict on us next, right? There are some other features as well. So the ethics of the warrior aristocrats is about ancestry and character. Who are you? And what's your character like? Whereas, and free will doesn't really have anything to do with it. You don't choose your parentage. You don't choose your character because that's the result of your parentage. Of course, you will act, you will do stuff, you will go into battle, and perhaps you will be courageous or perhaps you will be cowardly, and you will have to bear the consequences of the actions that show your character, but you don't really choose any of it. Whereas the morality of the slaves or the powerless people is all about choice. They've invented the doctrine of free will precisely because their morality is about acts and choice, and you choose either to whip that slave or not, right? Either to pillage that town or not, and you can be held responsible for it because it's your personal choice. And that requires the invention of the soul. That requires the invention of some part of you that's doing the choosing, right? So there's a whole metaphysics that comes along with that whole doctrine.